Welcome to the Zana AI Talk podcast channel. Okay, so today we are going to dive into something really cool, privacy-enhancing technologies.
PTs.
PTs, yeah, for short. So what's fascinating about these PTs...
Well, what's fascinating about them is that they allow us to use data for good things without giving up our privacy.
Excited. It's like having your cake and eating it too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've been reading about the FTC. They're cracking down on all these companies that make like bogus privacy promises, and we're seeing new laws pop up all over the place.
Yeah, it's clear that the world is getting a lot more serious about data protection.
For sure.
I mean, even the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy wants public feedback on this. They see huge potential for things like healthcare fighting, financial crime, even disaster response.
Wow, so we're talking about a wide range of applications here. But you shared some really fascinating research with me about PTs. What sparked your interest in this topic?
Honestly, it's this idea that we can still have innovation and protect people's information at the same time.
Yeah.
Like PTs cover everything from simple tools to like super complex cryptography.
Okay, so let's break this down. What exactly are PTTs? Like, what are some real-world examples that we can wrap our heads around?
So at their core, PETs are all about protecting your privacy while still allowing data to be useful.
Yeah.
So think of it like this. You want to donate to a good cause, right? But you don't necessarily want to give them your entire financial history.
Right.
PTs can help us with that.
Thoughtful. That makes total sense. So it's not about just like locking data away completely. It's about finding like clever ways to use it responsibly.
Exactly. One example is differential privacy.
Okay.
Clear pronunciation. Differential privacy. It's kind of like adding a blur to a photo. You can still see the main details, but individuals are protected.
Okay. So I can kind of picture that. But how does it actually work in practice? Like, how would that apply to something like the U.S. Census? I mean, they need accurate data, right?
They do, and that's where differential privacy really shines. It adds just enough noise to the data that no one can be identified, but we still get accurate population statistics.
It's pretty ingenious. Sounds like a real balancing act. Yeah, keeping the data useful, but not compromising people's privacy.
It is. And there are other PETs that work in completely different ways. Have you ever wondered how your phone learns your typing style without actually sending everything you type to the cloud?
That is impressive now that you mention it. I mean, my phone knows what I'm trying to say, even when I'm making a ton of mistakes.
Yeah, and that's because of something called federated learning.
Okay.
Basically, your phone is learning locally, and it's only sharing the improvements it makes to a central model.
Wow.
Your raw data stays private.
So it's like all the phones are working together as a team, but each phone kind of keeps its own data to itself.
Precisely. And this is being used for way more than just typing. Imagine training AI models on sensitive medical data without actually moving that data around.
Right.
Federated learning has huge potential there.
Wow, that is a game changer. Okay, so we've got this idea of privacy by like blurring the data with differential privacy, and then we've got privacy by keeping data separate, like with federated learning. Are there other approaches out there?
Absolutely. And this is where things get really mind-blowing. Let's talk about encrypted computation.
Intrigued. Encrypted computation. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, so imagine being able to perform calculations on data without ever decrypting it. It's like working with a locked box. You can manipulate the contents without ever seeing them directly.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. But how is that even useful in like the real world?
Well, one amazing application is private set intersection. So let's say two companies want to find common customers, right? Maybe for a joint marketing campaign.
Okay.
In the past, they'd have to share entire customer lists, which is obviously a huge privacy risk. But with private set intersection, they can find the overlap without ever revealing anyone's identity.
So they get the business insights they need, but individual customers stay protected.
Exactly. And it gets even more like sci-fi. There's something called private information retrieval, where you can search a database without the owner knowing what you searched for.
Wait, hold on. So I could research like something really sensitive online and nobody would know what I was looking at.
It is. You send an encrypted query, the database sends back an encrypted response, and only you have the key to unlock the information.
That's incredible, like ultimate privacy shield.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's clear that these PTs are being used in some really like innovative ways, but are there downsides? Like, do these things always work perfectly?
Well, no technology is perfect, right?
Yeah.
And PTs are still fairly new. One challenge is making sure that they're easy to use and integrate into existing systems.
Right.
Otherwise, they're not going to get adopted widely.
Yeah, what good is a super secure system if nobody can figure out how to use it?
Exactly. And there's always a balance to strike, right? We've seen how PTs can protect privacy, but sometimes that comes at a cost. The data might be slightly less accurate or less useful.
Huh.
Finding that sweet spot is key.
Thoughtful. So it's like anything else. There are these trade-offs. Are there any like historical examples of privacy-enhancing technologies that, well, didn't quite hit the mark?
Definitely. The Canadian Privacy Commissioner actually has a report that highlights some past consent technologies that basically flopped.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were aimed at giving users more control, but they were often too complex or just confusing to use.
So even with good intentions, things can go wrong. It sounds like user experience is really important.
Absolutely. And that's something that we need to keep in mind as PTs evolve. We need to make sure that they actually benefit users and that they don't create a false sense of security.
That's such a good point. This has been an incredible overview of PT so far. We've covered so much ground, from blurring data to keeping it separate to actually working with it while it's still encrypted.
Yeah, we've only scratched the surface.
I know, right? Okay, so before we get too deep into the technical weeds here, I want to bring it back to our listeners.
Good idea.
What questions might they have at this point?
Yeah, like what are they thinking?
Well, I'm sure some people are thinking, okay, these PTs sound amazing, but how do they actually affect me? What's the practical impact of these technologies on my everyday life?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And the truth is that PTs are already subtly shaping our digital experiences.
Hmm.
Remember how your phone learns your typing? That's PETs at work. And they're also being used to improve things like voice assistants and health tracking apps.
So even if we don't fully grasp all the technical details, we're already kind of benefiting from these PTs in some ways.
Exactly. And as they become more widespread, we can expect even more tangible benefits. Imagine having more control over what data you share online, or being able to search without anyone tracking your every query. PTs could make that a reality.
That's a really empowering thought. It sounds like PTs could be a key part of building a more privacy-respectful digital future. But like you said, they're not a silver bullet.
Right.
Right.
We need to be cautious and critical. Companies might claim that they're using PTs when they're not, or they might use them in ways that don't actually benefit users.
So it's kind of on us to stay informed and hold these companies accountable. We can't just blindly trust that they're doing the right thing.
Exactly. It's all about awareness and demanding transparency.
Well said. It's been so insightful exploring the world of PETs with you. This is definitely a topic that we need to keep talking about.
I agree. It's such an exciting and rapidly evolving field.
Now, before we wrap up this section of our deep dive, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier.
Sure. What is it?
You mentioned the FTC cracking down on companies making false privacy promises, and they're using a legal concept called unfairness to do so.
That's right. It's a pretty powerful tool they have to protect consumers.
Can you break down what unfairness means in this context?
Basically, it means a company is harming consumers, even if those consumers aren't aware of it or haven't explicitly consented. The FTC can step in and say, even if it's not illegal, it's still harmful, and we're going to stop you.
That's reassuring to know.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like the FTC is taking data privacy pretty seriously these days.
They are, which is a positive sign. That unfairness doctrine is a big deterrent for companies thinking about shady privacy practices.
It's a good reminder that we have these consumer protection agencies out there looking out for our interests. Well, that's a great point to transition to the next part of our deep dive.
Indeed. It's been a pleasure exploring the world of PTs with you today.
Likewise. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this fascinating journey into the future of privacy. Stay tuned for more insights in the next part of our deep dive.
You know, it's interesting. We're seeing how different players are approaching this whole adoption of TTs.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we talked about how the White House is exploring the potential benefits for all sorts of things. But what about industry? Are companies actually using these technologies, like, in the real world?
They are. Yeah, you bet they are. It's still early days. But we're already seeing some really interesting examples, especially in areas where privacy is absolutely critical, like healthcare.
Okay, give us the inside scoop. What are some of the ways companies are putting these PTs to work?
Well, one area where PTs are really making a difference is medical research. Think about all the sensitive data involved in healthcare. You've got patient records, genetic information, clinical trial data.
Yeah.
It's a treasure trove of information that could lead to amazing breakthroughs in medicine. But it also needs to be handled with extreme care.
For sure. I can definitely see how PTs could be a game changer in that kind of environment.
Exactly. And researchers are already finding creative ways to use PTs to protect patient privacy while still enabling this really valuable research. For instance, they're using federated learning to train AI models on medical data that's distributed across multiple hospitals or research institutions.
So they're able to pool data from all these different sources without actually having to share the raw data itself.
Precisely. The learning happens locally and only the model updates are shared. That way, no single institution has access to all of the sensitive information.
Wow, that's incredibly clever. It seems like federated learning has the potential to unlock a whole new world of possibilities in medical research.
Absolutely. And it's not just limited to healthcare. Federated learning is also being explored in other industries where data privacy is a major concern, such as finance and education.
Hmm, that's exciting to hear. It seems like PDTs are starting to gain some real momentum.
Yeah, they are, and that's a good thing. But it's important to remember that PTs aren't a silver bullet. They're just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to protecting privacy in the digital age.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's not just about the technology itself, it's also about how it's implemented and used.
Exactly. And that's where things can get a little tricky. We need to make sure that PTs are designed and deployed in a way that actually benefits users, not just companies.
That's such a critical point. I can see how PETs could be misused if we're not careful.
Absolutely. For example, there's a risk that companies could use PTs to create a false sense of security. They might claim that they're protecting your privacy by using a particular PD, but if that technology isn't implemented correctly or if it's not actually addressing the real privacy risks, it could end up doing more harm than good.
So we need to be like discerning consumers and not just take companies at their word when they say they're using privacy-enhancing technologies.
Exactly. We need to ask questions, demand transparency, and hold companies accountable for their privacy practices.
Well said. It seems like there's a lot of work to be done in terms of educating the public about PETs and their implications.
There is. And that's why conversations like this are so important.
I'm glad we're having this discussion. It's
Yeah.
definitely helping me understand this whole complex landscape better.
Me too. And hopefully it's doing the same for our listeners.
Speaking of our listeners, I think we should take a moment to address some of the questions that might be on their minds right now.
Okay, great idea. What are they thinking?
Well, I'm sure some people are thinking, okay, these PETs sound pretty amazing, but how do they actually affect me? What's the practical impact of these technologies on my everyday life?
That's a very valid question, and the answer is that PETs are already having a subtle but growing impact on our lives, even if we don't realize it.
Hmm. Can you give us some examples?
Certainly. Think about your smartphone. We already talked about how federated learning is being used to personalize your typing experience without sending your data to the cloud. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. PETs are also being used to improve the privacy of other features on your phone, such as voice assistants and health tracking apps.
So even if I don't fully understand how these PETs work, I'm already benefiting from them in some ways.
Exactly. And as PTs become more widespread, we can expect to see even more tangible benefits in our daily lives. For instance, PETs could help us control our online privacy better. They could give us more fine-grained control over what data we share with companies and how that data is used.
That would be amazing. I'm tired of feeling like I have no control over my online data.
I hear you. And PTs offer a glimmer of hope in that regard. They have the potential to empower us as individuals and give us back some of the control that we've lost.
That's a very empowering thought. It seems like PTs could play a key role in shaping a more privacy-respectful digital future.
I believe so, and that's why it's so important to have these conversations and raise awareness about these technologies. The more people understand about PTs, the better equipped we'll be to demand that they're used in a way that benefits all of us.
Well said. I'm feeling much more optimistic about the future of privacy now that I know more about these PTs.
Me too. It's not all doom and gloom. There are innovative solutions out there, and PTs are definitely at the forefront of that innovation.
This deep dive has been incredibly enlightening. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure.
Now, before we move on to our final thoughts, I want to circle back to something we mentioned earlier.
Sure, what is it?
We talked about how the FTC is cracking down on companies that are making false privacy promises. And you mentioned that they're using a legal concept called unfairness to do so.
That's right. It's a powerful tool that the FTC has at its disposal.
Can you explain a bit more about what unfairness means in this context?
Certainly. In the context of data privacy, unfairness basically means that a company's practices are causing harm to consumers, even if those consumers aren't fully aware of the harm or if they haven't explicitly consented to it.
Okay, so it's about protecting consumers from practices that are detrimental to their privacy, even if those practices aren't necessarily illegal.
Exactly. It's a way for the FTC to step in and say, look, even if you're not technically breaking any laws, what you're doing is still harmful and we're going to stop you.
It's reassuring to know.
Yeah.
It seems like the FTC is really taking data privacy seriously.
They are, and that's a positive development. The unfairness doctrine is a powerful tool that can help deter companies from engaging in shady privacy practices.
It's a good reminder that we have consumer protection agencies out there that are looking out for our interests.
Absolutely. It's important to be aware of our rights and to know that we have recourse if companies are violating those rights.
Well, that's a great note to transition to the final part of our deep dive into the fascinating world of PETs.
I agree. It's been a pleasure diving deep into this world of PETs with you today.
Likewise. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey into the future of privacy. We'll be back shortly with our final thoughts and some key takeaways. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into this world of PTs.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey exploring all these cutting-edge privacy solutions.
It really has. We've covered, how these PTs work, real-world examples, even some potential pitfalls to watch out for. But before we wrap up, I think it's crucial to kind of connect PETs back to this bigger picture of data privacy regulations.
Yeah, excellent point. We've touched on things like GDPR and CCPA, but how do these regulations actually encourage the use of PETs?
That's a great question. Is it just a matter of, companies trying to avoid getting slapped with fines?
Well, there's definitely some of that, but a lot of these regulations actually emphasize a principle called data minimization, which is like a really core idea behind PETs.
Right. It's all about only collecting the data that you absolutely need.
Exactly. And PTs can be incredibly useful for achieving that goal. For instance, differential privacy lets you glean insights from data without actually having to gather all that sensitive information in the first place.
So it's like baking privacy into the process right from the very beginning.
Precisely. And some newer regulations, like the EU's AI Act, actually mention specific PTs as valid safeguards, things like secure multi-party computation.
Wow. So in a way, these regulations are almost like pushing the adoption of PETs by providing incentives for companies to use them.
Absolutely. Regulations create this demand for privacy-enhancing solutions, and PTs are ready to meet that demand.
It's amazing to see how regulations and technology are kind of intertwined in this space.
Yeah, they really are. They're both pushing each other forward.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground today. What PTs are, why they matter, how they work, even how regulations are starting to shape them. But before we sign off, any final thoughts on where you see the future of PTs going?
I'm cautiously optimistic. I think PETs really have the potential to fundamentally change how we think about data privacy, but it's going to take a collective effort.
What do you mean by that?
We need researchers to keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible. We need policymakers to create regulations that incentivize the use of these technologies. And most importantly, we need consumers to demand that companies actually protect their privacy.
So it's kind of like this three-pronged approach.
Yeah.
Innovation, regulation, and awareness.
Exactly. It'll take all three to create a future where we can benefit from all this amazing data-driven innovation without having to sacrifice our privacy.
That's an inspiring message to end on. So what does all of this mean for you, our listener? PTs are these incredibly powerful tools that could reshape how we think about data privacy in this digital age. They're already being used in ways that you might not even realize, and this whole field is just getting started. It's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. And if you're interested in learning more, I highly recommend checking out the World Economic Forum's white paper on PET use cases in financial technology and infrastructure.
That's a great resource. Thanks for sharing. And of course, you can always dive deeper into any of the topics that we've discussed today by exploring the source material that you provided. It's amazing how much information is out there if you just know where to look.
It truly is. And remember, staying informed is the first step towards taking control of your own digital privacy.
Well said. This has been an incredible deep dive into the world of PTs.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure.
And to all of our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope you found it informative and engaging. Please subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into fascinating topics.